Hey guys! Tonight, we're stepping into a world where the sun setting was on just the end of the day, was the beginning of survival mode. You're standing at your window right now, watching darkness creep across your neighborhood. It's probably thinking about what show to binge next or whether you remembered to charge your phone. But imagine if that approaching darkness meant real danger. It's not metaphorical danger, not Netflix and chill danger, but actual predators, criminals, and death lurking just beyond your front door. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're re-listening from and what time it is there I. Love seeing how this content travels around the world while you all winding down for the night. You probably won't survive your first week in pre-electric nighttime. And honestly, most people didn't make it much longer than that. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. During daylight hours, your village felt familiar, safe, predictable. Your ancestors weren't afraid of the dark because they were superstitious. They were afraid because darkness literally killed. You knew every face, every building, every path. But now in the growing darkness, that same familiar landscape becomes alien territory. Wild animals become bolder in darkness. And remember, this is before most dangerous wildlife was hunted to extinction or driven into remote areas. Wolves still roam the European countryside. Bears wander into villages looking for food. There are no streetlights, no reflective surfaces, no warning signs. One wrong step, and you're face first in a pile of horse manure if you're lucky. More likely, you're falling into an open sewer, breaking your leg in a pothole, or walking straight into a low-hanging sign that could knock you unconscious. You slide your feet rather than lifting them, feeling for obstacles before committing your weight. You keep one hand extended as a buffer against walls, branches, or other people. People behave differently when they think they're invisible. The anonymity of night brings out behaviors that daylight would suppress. It's like the entire world becomes a masquerade ball where everyone is wearing the same black mask, and you never know who's hiding behind it. Every sunset is a countdown to survival. Every dawn is a small victory. And you're about to discover that everything you thought you knew about nighttime was wrong. You breathe quietly, listening constantly for sounds that indicate danger or safety. Your entire body becomes a sensing instrument, compensating for the vision you've lost. Even domestic animals become unpredictable threats when you can't see them coming. People who seem respectable during the day might rob you at night, knowing you can't identify them later. Even family members become suspect when you can't see their faces clearly. Trust becomes a luxury you can't afford. Servants might attack their masters under cover of darkness. Either way, the result is the same. When the sun goes down, your life expectancy goes down with it. You're not just afraid of the dark. You're afraid of what the dark does to people, including yourself. A startled horse in the dark could easily kick you to death, and you'd never see it coming. The phrase dead of night wasn't poetic, it was statistical. The baker's shop that seemed so welcoming this morning now looks like a perfect hiding spot for robbers. The alley you walk through without thinking twice now feels like a death trap. You're constantly tripping over your own garments, getting tangled in branches you can't see, or having your cloak grabbed by someone or something you can't identify. Every piece of clothing becomes a potential weapon against you. Even your own neighbors become suspicious figures moving through the shadows. Your imagination runs wild when you can't see what's actually there. That rustling in the bushes could be a cat or a killer. Those footsteps behind you might belong to a friend or a predator. Medieval people understood that fear itself could be lethal panic, causes people to make stupid decisions, run in dangerous directions, or freeze when they should act. Your heart rate actually increases as shadows lengthen because your body knows what's coming. This isn't psychological, it's biological. For thousands of years, human survival depended on recognizing that darkness equals danger. And that instinct runs deeper than any modern comfort can override. You watch the last light fade from your small window, and suddenly every sound outside becomes a potential threat. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're living in medieval Europe, and the sun is setting. The transformation is immediate and terrifying. You're not being paranoid, you're being smart. Statistics from medieval coroner records show that violent crime rates increased by over 300% after sunset. Highway robbers, murderers, and rapists all preferred to work under cover of night when witnesses were scarce and escape routes were invisible. But it's not just human predators you need to worry about. The physical dangers are compounded by simple accidents that daylight would prevent. You're walking on uneven cobblestones or dirt paths full of holes, animal waste, and debris. Your clothing makes everything worse. Long robes, heavy cloaks, and loose fabric that seem practical during the day now catch on everything in the dark. The psychological warfare of darkness is just as deadly as the physical dangers. You learn to move differently in darkness. Every step is deliberate, calculated. The social dynamics of nighttime create their own terrors. Normal social rules break down in darkness. You realize that darkness doesn't just hide dangers, it creates them. Historians still argue whether medieval people were more violent by nature, or if darkness simply provided more opportunities for existing violence to manifest. This is your new reality. You're standing in your medieval home as darkness falls, and you face a brutal economic reality. Light costs more than food. That single tallow candle flickering on your table represents about 3 hours of manual labor. In today's money, you're literally burning through the equivalent of a McDonald's meal every time you light it. Think about that for a moment. You have more light bulbs in your bathroom right now than most medieval families had candles for the entire year. You're rationing light the way modern people ration expensive medication, carefully calculating whether each moment of illumination is worth the cost. And that's assuming you can even afford tallow candles, which puts you in the upper middle class of medieval society. Picture the smell of burning hamburger grease mixed with rotten eggs, and you're getting close. These candles smoke constantly, creating a haze that burns your eyes and coats everything in greasy residue. The smell clings to your clothes, your hair, your skin. You literally stink of poverty and darkness. You're collecting every scrap of animal fat from cooking, saving bacon grease, beef tallow, even the fat trimmed from leather. Nothing gets wasted because fat equals light and light equals survival. Poor families would literally go hungry to save fat for candles, choosing between nutrition and illumination in a way that would horrify modern parents. But even these horrible candles are precious enough that you'll endure the stench rather than waste the light. You're dipping dried reeds in whatever fat you can scrape together, creating these pathetic flaming sticks that burn for maybe 20 minutes and smell like a garbage fire. The light is so weak you can barely see beyond arm's length, and they're constantly going out in the slightest breeze. But even rush lights require resources most families can't spare. Lighting extra candles becomes a form of prayer, a way of marking important moments. Candle snuffers, become essential tools for preserving every possible moment of light. You reuse melted wax, save candle stubs, and treat every drop of oil like liquid. The phrase "worth a candle" enters common language, because people literally calculate whether activities justify the cost of illumination. Either way, the result is clear. For most of human history, most families owned maybe 2 or 3 candles total, reserved for absolute emergencies or special occasions. Olive oil costs a fortune in Northern Europe, where olives don't grow. Whale oil is available in coastal areas, but it's reserved for the wealthy. Candle theft is a serious crime with harsh punishments, because stealing someone's light is essentially stealing their safety. Professional candle makers guard their supplies like banks guard money. Even churches lock up their beeswax candles because they're too valuable to leave unguarded. Remember those crocodile dung sunscreens we talked about? Well, they're nothing compared to the lengths people go to create and protect artificial light. Fish oil smells so horrible that most people prefer sitting in darkness rather than enduring the stench. You're constantly calculating the cost-benefit ratio of different lighting options, like a medieval. You'd literally work from sunrise to sunset just to afford 4 hours of decent light. Most people never saw a beeswax candle in their entire lives. That was luxury reserved for churches, nobles, and the wealthy merchant class. Dote. Sunset means bedtime, not by choice, but by economic necessity. You can immediately identify someone's economic status by how much artificial light they use. The wealthy flaunt their prosperity by burning multiple candles simultaneously. An ostentatious display that's basically the medieval equivalent of driving a Ferrari. Middle-class families might afford 1 candle per evening for essential tasks. The entire family's huddled together in complete darkness for 12 to 16 hours every night, depending on the season. They time their sleep schedules around natural light cycles because they literally cannot afford to be awake in darkness. The economics of medieval lighting were absolutely ruthless. Beeswax candles, which burned cleaner and brighter, cost roughly what a skilled craftsman earned in a full day. So you make do with tallow candles made from animal fat, and they're absolutely disgusting. You develop elaborate strategies for maximizing your candle budget. Families gather in a single room to share 1 candle, rather than lighting multiple rooms. You time your evening activities around the candles burning, schedule dinner preparation, mending clothes, telling stories, all crammed into those precious hours of artificial light. When the candle burns down to a stub, you save even that tiny remainder for true emergencies. The candle-making process itself reveals just how desperate people were for light. Rush lights offer a cheaper alternative, but they're almost worse than darkness itself. Oil lamps exist, but they're even more expensive than candles. Energy economist. The truly poor, which means most of the population, simply go without artificial light entirely. This creates a weird social hierarchy based on light access. Poor make do with firelight from their hearth, if they can afford fuel for that. The psychological impact of light rationing shapes entire cultures. You learn to associate artificial light with special occasions, celebrations, religious ceremonies. Even wealthy households develop obsessive habits around light conservation. Servants are trained to trim wicks perfectly to maximize burn time. Gold. Waste not, want not becomes literally a matter of survival. The candle trade creates its own criminal economy. Historians still argue whether the high cost of artificial light actually shaped human sleep patterns, or if our natural circadian rhythms just happen to align with economic necessity. Darkness wasn't just inconvenient, It was a luxury tax that only the wealthy could afford to avoid. You're about to discover that this economic reality of expensive light created some very strange sleeping habits that modern humans have completely forgotten. You're lying in your medieval bed at what you think is the middle of the night, but suddenly you're wide awake, not anxious about tomorrow awake, not I had too much coffee awake, but naturally, peacefully, completely alert. Your body is telling you it's time to get up, even though it's pitch black outside, and you went to sleep hours ago. This was productive time with its own activities and social customs. It was like having a secret bonus period of the day that belonged entirely to you and your family. Congratulations, you're experiencing first sleep, and your about medieval prayer books included specific prayers for the middle of the night. Not because people were insomniac, but because everyone expected to be awake then. Literary works reference first sleep and second sleep as casually as we reference breakfast and lunch. Legal documents from the era talk about crimes committed after first sleep, but before second sleep, treating this timing as common knowledge. Parents and children would share quiet conversations in the darkness, telling stories, sharing concerns, or just enjoying each other's company without the pressures of daylight responsibilities. Couples use this time for emotional intimacy and physical closeness that the lack of privacy during busy days made difficult. The watching time adapted to your needs and the natural rhythms of agricultural life. It was like having a daily retreat built into every night. Indigenous peoples in the Americas, African societies, in Asian to discover that everything you know about normal sleep patterns is actually a modern invention. We might actually be the weird ones, trying to force our bodies into one long sleep block that fights against thousands of years of evolutionary programming. Because people were shorter though they were, but because you didn't need to lie flat for 8 straight hours. It was like having a built-in security system where family members took turns being alert during the most dangerous hours. Poor digestion and mental confusion. They believed the break between sleeps allowed your body to process food, balance humors, and restore mental clarity. Modern sleep researchers are starting to wonder if they might have been onto something. No one had to force themselves to stay awake on guard duty. Your body naturally provided the alertness when it was needed most. You slept sitting up or semi-reclined for the first sleep, which was supposed to be better for what's clear is that within a few generations of widespread electric lighting, this ancient human behavior pattern disappeared almost completely, leaving us with sleep problems our ancestors never experienced. Medieval people didn't sleep for 8 straight hours like we do today. In winter, you might use the time to repair tools, spin thread, or tell stories that pass down family history and cultural knowledge. Summer watching periods were for checking gardens. Instead, they practiced what historians call segmented sleep, or divided sleep. And it was so natural that they didn't even have a special name for it. It was just how humans slept. Some people believe this in-between time was when the veil between worlds was thinnest, making it perfect for prayer, meditation, or divination. Others used it for practical magic brewing, herbal remedies, casting protective spells, or performing rituals that required undisturbed concentration, whether you believed in the supernatural aspects or not. The watching period definitely felt different from regular waking hours. You'd go to bed around sunset, sleep for about 4 hours, then wake up naturally in the middle of the night for 1 to 3 hours, then fall back asleep until dawn.
Oh.
This wasn't insomnia or a sleep disorder. This was normal human behavior for thousands of years. During that middle of a night wake period, called the watch or watching, you weren't just lying there waiting to fall back asleep. Families would get up, tend the fire, check on livestock, pray, have quiet conversations, or engage in intimate activities that the crowded daytime hours didn't allow. The watching period had its own unique atmosphere that modern humans never experience. We're awake, but the world is still fundamentally asleep. There's a profound quietness that's different from daytime silence. It's deeper, more complete. Your mind operates differently during these hours. They do. People reported having their most creative thoughts, solving problems, or having philosophical insights during the watch. It was like your brain used this time for processing and organizing information without the distractions of daily life. This segmented sleep pattern explains so many historical mysteries that confused scholars for years. Your sleeping arrangements are designed around this two-part night. Medieval beds were often shorter than modern beds, not digestion and circulation. The second sleep was when you'd lie down fully for deeper rest. The social dynamics of the watching period created intimate bonds that modern families rarely experience. Different seasons brought different watching activities, observing weather patterns, or simply enjoying the cooler nighttime air. The transition between first and second sleep had its own rituals and superstitions. This sleep pattern wasn't just European. Similar practices existed across cultures worldwide. Cultures all had versions of segmented sleep, suggesting this might be the natural human sleep pattern before artificial lighting disrupted our circadian rhythms. The watching period also served practical security purposes. Having someone naturally awake in the middle of the night meant better protection against fires, thieves, or wild animals. Medical texts from the period describe the watching time as essential for health, claiming that people who tried to sleep straight through the night would suffer from melancholy. Historians still argue whether artificial lighting destroyed our natural segmented sleep patterns, or if industrialization and work schedules simply made it impractical to maintain the old ways. Remember that expensive candle you were burning earlier? Well, you're about to discover that most of your nighttime hours happen in complete darkness, and you'll need to navigate some pretty gross bathroom logistics without any light at all. You're lying in your medieval bed during that watching period we just talked about, and suddenly nature calls. Not a gentle suggestion, an urgent biological demand that can't wait until dawn. Now you face one of the most disgusting realities of pre-electric nighttime, answering the call of nature in complete darkness, while trying not to die, get robbed, or fall into something unmentionable. Your first option is the chamber pot, that ceramic blessing sitting somewhere in your room that you now have to locate by feel in pitch black darkness. The sound of your fingernails scraping against the floor is amplified in the silence. And you re-praying you do, and accidentally stick your hand into something that will traumatize you for life. Someone has to empty these things, and that someone is usually the lowest ranking person in the household, children, servants, or the poorest family member. You're creeping through dark houses, collecting containers of human waste, trying not to spill anything while navigating by feel alone. They're called night soil men, and this means leaving the safety of your house, walking through your yard, and if you live in a city, it's getting thrown out the window into the street below. Hopefully with a shouted warning like garde à l'eau, which is medieval French for watch out for the water. Criminals knew people had to use the privy eventually, so they'd wait in ambush near latrines, especially targeting wealthy households. You're literally caught with, except it's not water. And you're about to learn why walking city streets at night is like navigating a minefield of human excrement. The smell alone could knock you unconscious. Long skirts and robes make squatting over chamber pots or privy holes much more complicated, especially in crawling around on your hands and knees trying to find this essential piece of medieval technology without knocking it over or discovering it. It's already been used by someone else in your family. You're retrying to manage multiple layers of heavy fabric while maintaining your balance over a whole yuku and sea. Your entire house reeks of human waste because chamber pots sit around for hours, privy pits overflow and washing. This isn't just unpleasant. It's a genuine health hazard that spreads disease and attracts vermin. But taking a child outside to the latrine in the dark exposes both adult and child to all the nighttime dangers we've discussed. They employ servants specifically for chamber pot duty, install multiple pots throughout the house, and sometimes even build indoor garderobes, essentially medieval flush toilets that drop waste through chutes into moats or rivers. But even these luxury solutions create their own problems and still require navigating in darkness. Many families just let small children relieve themselves in corners of the house and clean it up later, if at all. Plus, women traveling alone to outdoor privies face the same assault risks that make all nighttime activities more dangerous for them. If you're poor, you're using whatever container you can find: a bucket, a broken pot, even just a designated corner of your single room that the whole family shares. Not just slipped and got dirty, actually fell completely into pits full of human waste and drowned. Medieval coroner records list death by privy as a surprisingly common cause of mortality. Because the darkness wasn't just inconvenient, it was actively hunting you. Imagine explaining that to your family. Sorry, Dad died in the toilet hole. Privacy is a concept that doesn't exist when 8 people sleep in one room, and everyone knows exactly what everyone else is doing at all times. You're sitting on a wooden bench with a hole cut in it, suspended over a pit that may or may not have been properly maintained. In winter, that wooden seat is cold enough to steal your breath and possibly freeze your skin to the wood. Medieval crime records are full of privy murders and latrine robberies that sound almost comical until you realize people actually died this way. In summer, the flies and maggots create a biblical plague situation that makes using the facilities a test of endurance and determination. You develop a strange intimacy with your family's bodily functions that would horrify modern people. Found it. Now, you're squatting over what amounts to a fancy bowl, trying to aim in complete darkness, while hoping the pot is positioned correctly under you. There's no toilet paper. Obviously, you're using whatever cloth scraps you can afford. Or more likely, just hoping for the best and dealing with cleanliness issues later. The smell is immediate and overwhelming in the enclosed space. And you realize this pot will be sitting in your bedroom for hours until someone can empty it at dawn. But chamber pots are luxury items that many families can't afford. The logistics of chamber pot maintenance create their own nighttime economy, have the worst job in medieval society. Where does all this waste go? Rural families have better options, but more dangerous journeys. You need to get to the family privy, which is usually located at the far end of your property for obvious reasons. Complete darkness, past all those predators and criminals we discussed earlier, just to reach a wooden box built over a hole in the ground. The medieval outhouse is an engineering marvel of discomfort and danger. But here's where it gets really dangerous. Outhouse attacks were a genuine threat. Your pants down, vulnerable and unable to run or fight effectively. The privy pit itself presents its own hazards. These holes could be 6 to 12 feet deep, and people occasionally fell in. Women face additional nighttime, bathroom dangers that men don't experience, Darkness. Children's bathroom situations are particularly grim. They're too small to safely use adult-sized chamber pots or privy holes. Without supervision, the smell issue compounds everything else. Facilities are minimal. Become nose-blind to odors that would make modern people vomit immediately. Wealthy households develop elaborate systems to manage nighttime bathroom logistics. Historians still argue whether medieval people were more tolerant of unsanitary conditions by necessity, or if they simply had no choice but to adapt to circumstances that would kill. Modern. Humans through shock and disgust. Either way, you're learning to live with bathroom realities that make modern porta potties seem like luxury accommodations. Remember that segmented sleep pattern? You're about to discover why people preferred staying in bed during those watching periods rather than venturing outside. You've just finished your disgusting nighttime bathroom adventure, and now you're trying to get back to your house safely when you hear footsteps behind you. Not the casual footsteps of another unfortunate soul dealing with their own chamber pot situation. These are deliberate, measured, following your movements. You've just encountered the reality that medieval criminals were just opportunistic thugs stumbling around in the dark. These were desperate people committing crimes of passion, or organized professionals who understood that darkness gave them every possible advantage over their victims. You're dealing with people who have spent years learning to move silently in the dark, who know every alley and hiding spot in the area, and who can identify potential victims by sound, smell, and movement patterns alone. They learn to identify wealthy targets by the sound of their clothing silk rustles differently than wool. Leather shoes sound different from they were professionals who used darkness as their primary tool. And they were very, very good at their jobs. Your money isn't in a wallet, it's in a leather pouch hanging from your belt. The thieves literally cut the strings holding your purse to steal it. But they don't just cut and run. This anonymity attracts violent criminals who use the cover of darkness to assault, rob, or murder sex workers without fear of identification. Clients face similar risks being lured into dark buildings and attacked by gangs who know exactly when and where vulnerable men will be isolated. They follow you in darkness, waiting for the perfect moment when you're distracted, isolated, or struggling with something like that chamber pot we just discussed. The cut happens so quickly and quietly that you don't realize you've been robbed until you reach for money that's no longer there. Fences people who buy and sell stolen goods operate exclusively at night because they need darkness to conduct business without witnesses, and the ability to identify threats and opportunities by sound and smell alone. Smugglers move contraband through cities after dark, using the same routes and techniques as robbers and murderers. Some women work as decoys, pretending to be vulnerable targets to lure victims into ambushes where male accomplices wait in hiding. Others specialize in poisoning drinks at taverns that stay open after dark, robbing victims after the poison takes effect. The darkness that makes women more vulnerable to crime also makes them more dangerous as criminals, because potential victims do unexpected attacks from people they clearly see or identify. A professional thief can assess your economic status just by listening to you walk in the dark. Being outside after curfew isn't just breaking the lits, essentially volunteering to become a victim, or if the combination of darkness and limited law enforcement just made crime more visible and traumatic for victims and communities. Medieval criminals had no choice but to interact directly with their targets, often violently, because most valuable items were carried on the person rather than stored in buildings. Simple purse cutting can escalate to murder if the victim fights back. If the thief is startled, or if witnesses appear well, you're about to discover that keeping your fire alive was just about comforted. was literally the difference between life and death. This means every robbery involves potential murder. Every theft includes assault. And every crime scene becomes a life or death struggle between people who can't see each other clearly. The few people with legitimate reasons to be out at night, like night watchmen or emergency medical calls, travel in groups. Families barricade their doors with furniture, not just to keep criminals out, but to slow them down long enough for help to arrive, though help is unlikely to come in darkness. When no one else wants to risk becoming a victim themselves, and carry multiple weapons because they know they're entering a war zone. Welcome to the world of nightwalkers, medieval England's term for criminals who specifically operated after dark. Highway robbery takes on a whole new. Churches lock their doors at night, not to keep people out, but to keep criminals from using sacred spaces as headquarters for their operations. Even holy ground is unsafe when darkness provides cover for people who do want respect divine authority or social. Medieval robbers would stretch ropes across roads at neck height, clotheslining travelers off their horses in complete darkness. Victims often died from the initial impact, making these rope tricks essentially murder machines disguised as robbery techniques. The survivors would be robbed while lying stunned or injured on the ground, completely helpless in the darkness. Meaning when highways are just dirt paths through forests and fields with no lighting whatsoever, city criminals develop even more sophisticated techniques. They know which streets have the loosest cobblestones that make noise when stepped on, so they avoid those areas when stalking victims. Wooden clogs and jewelry makes distinctive noises when people move. The cut purse becomes the medieval equivalent of a modern pickpocket, except infinitely more dangerous. Prostitution becomes exponentially more dangerous after dark, both for the women involved and their clients. Medieval brothels operate without any lighting, making it impossible to identify either customers or workers. The concept of sanctuary becomes literally about finding safe places to hide from criminals rather than just spiritual refuge. Conventions, medieval cities, develop curfew laws not just for social control, but because local authorities know they can't protect citizens after dark. Professional criminals create their own underground economy that thrives in darkness. The line between different types of criminals blurs in darkness because everyone needs the same skills. Silent movement. Knowledge of hiding places. Female criminals face unique challenges, but also unique opportunities in the nighttime criminal economy. The most terrifying aspect of medieval. Night crime is how personal it becomes. Modern criminals want to avoid confrontation. They prefer stealing cars or breaking into empty houses rather than direct contact with victims. Murder rates in medieval cities skyrocket after dark. Not just because criminals are more active, but because every criminal encounter has the potential to turn lethal. Unexpectedly, medieval criminals carry knives not just as tools for cutting purse strings, but as weapons for killing anyone who threatens their escape or anonymity. The psychological warfare of nighttime crime affects entire communities. People develop paranoia about nighttime sounds, assuming every footstep or voice indicates criminal activity. Historians still argue whether medieval crime rates were actually higher than modern crime rates. What's certain is that criminals own the night in ways that would be impossible in the modern world of surveillance cameras, street lighting, and rapid police response. Remember those expensive candles and the economic reality of rationing light? You're waking up during that medieval watching period again, but this time, something's wrong. The fire in your hearth, the one that's supposed to burn continuously, has died down to barely glowing embers. Your heart races because you realize you're facing a medieval emergency that could kill your entire family before morning. Fire wasn't just about warmth or light. It was your lifeline to survival, and keeping it alive was literally a matter of life and death. The phrase, keeping the home fires burning, is unromantic poetry. It's a deadly serious survival instruction that medieval families lived by every single day. Your fire provides heat that prevents you from freezing to death in winter, light that keeps predators and criminals away. You need to understand different types of wood and how they burn at different rates. Oak burns slow and hot for overnight heating. Pine burns fast and bright for quick light. Birch bark catches easily for starting fires. Applewood burns clean for cooking. Cedar repels insects. You're essentially a medieval fuel engineer, calculating burn rates, heat output, and resource consumption like your life depends on it, because it does. You're not just picking up sticks, you're felling trees, splitting logs, seasoning wood for months to make it burn properly, and storing massive amounts of fuel in limited space. Poor families spend most of the ability to cook food that won't poison you, and protection from the supernatural forces that everyone believes lurk in complete darkness. Let that fire die, and you're essentially committing slow suicide. Someone has to stay awake to tend the fire through the night, and that responsibility usually falls to the lowest ranking family member. Often children or elderly relatives who do heavy labor during the day. You're essentially assigning family members to night shift duty, where falling asleep on the job could kill everyone in the house. Children are trained from early ages to fear fire extinction more than burns or smoke inhalation. House fires spread quickly through wooden structures with thatched roofs, often consuming entire neighborhoods. People die from smoke inhalation while trying to save their fires during emergencies. Children are burned trying to maintain flames. They're too young to handle safely. Neighbors help each other with fuel gathering, fire starting, and emergency flame borrowing. Entire villages coordinate fuel collection to ensure everyone has access to burning the very thing. Adults check the fire obsessively throughout the night, unable to sleep soundly because they constantly listening for changes in the sound of burning wood that might indicate problems. Spring and fall bring unpredictable weather that can affect fuel supplies and burning conditions. And you were about to discover that the sounds of night weren't just noise, they were a complex communication system that could save your life or seal your doom. Multiple hearths in different rooms provide backup heat sources. Professional servants specialize in fire maintenance, allowing family members to sleep without worrying about flame preservation. A quality fuel like seasoned hardwoods burns more reliably and efficiently. But even wealthy families live with the constant awareness that fire failure means disaster. You're using flint and steel, striking sparks into tinder made from charred cloth or dried fungus. This process can take 15 minutes or more in good conditions, and it's nearly impossible in wet or windy weather. Starting fire from scratch is so difficult that most people prefer to borrow flame from neighbors rather than risk the time and resources required to create new fire. Special prayers for fire safety, protective charms hung near hearths, and ritual behaviors designed to ensure continuous burning. Whether or not you believe in the supernatural aspects, these practices reinforce the critical importance of fire management through cultural repetition and community support. You're constantly adapting your fire management strategy to seasonal changes that are literally matters of survival. You're scrambling in the darkness, feeling around the hearth for anything that might still hold a spark. Your fingers search through warm ash, looking for live coals that can be coaxed back to flame. This is why medieval houses are built around the central hearth, not for convenience, but because the fire is the heart of the home in the most literal sense possible. When the fire dies, the house becomes just another dark, cold, dangerous place that's barely better than being outside. Medieval fire management is a complex science that takes years to master. The process of maintaining a continuous, you're calculating exactly how much wood to add and when, because too little means the fire dies, but too much creates dangerous flare-ups that could burn your house down. Medieval fire maintenance is like being a 24-hour nuclear reactor operator, except the consequences of failure are more immediate. Fire requires constant vigilance and planning. You're banking coals before bed, covering them with ash to slow the burn while keeping them alive until morning. Your fuel supply creates its own survival challenges. Gathering enough wood to keep a fire burning continuously requires enormous amounts of labor and planning. Their daylight hours just gathering enough fuel to survive the next night, creating a cycle of poverty where survival activities prevent people from doing work that might improve their situation. The social dynamics of fire maintenance reveal medieval family hierarchies. Different seasons bring different fire challenges. Winter fires need to burn hotter to prevent freezing, consuming more fuel when resources are scarcest. Summer fires still need to be maintained for cooking and protection, but now you're dealing with heat that makes indoor spaces unbearable. Fire starting technology is primitive and unreliable, making the preservation of existing flames absolutely critical. The psychological pressure of fire maintenance affects entire families. You develop anxiety about flame preservation that modern people can't understand. Fire-related accidents create their own category of medieval horrors. That keeps you alive is also constantly trying to kill you. Wealthy households develop elaborate fire management systems that poor families can only dream of. The communal aspects of fire sharing create medieval social networks. It's based on survival necessity, materials. But these same social networks can turn competitive when resources become scarce, creating conflicts over wood rights and fire sharing that sometimes escalate to violence. Religious and superstitious practices around fire preservation reflect how seriously medieval people took flame maintenance. Historians still argue whether medieval people were actually more skilled at fire management than modern people, or if they simply had no choice but to develop expertise that we've lost because of modern heating and lighting technology. What's clear is that fire maintenance was one of the most essential survival skills in human history, and failure meant death for entire families. You're beginning to realize that medieval life wasn't just difficult, it was a constant series of life or death decisions that started over fresh every single day. You're lying in your medieval bed, fire safely tended, and suddenly the night comes alive with sounds. Not the chaotic noise of modern life, but a complex symphony of information that your survival depends on understanding. That distant howling is unjust wolves being wolves telling you exactly how many are in the pack, how hungry they are, and whether they're moving toward or away from your village. Owl calls indicate whether changes different species hoot before rain, snow, or clear skies, and experienced farmers can predict tomorrow's conditions just by listening to which owls are active. Bat behavior reveals insect populations, which tells you about crop health and disease patterns. Even the way dogs bark in distant villages, crows cawing at night, means something has disturbed their roosts, possibly human intruders, predators, or fires. Horses whinnying in the distance could signal mounted travelers, thieves, or military movements. Stone buildings reflect and echo noises, making it difficult to determine direction and distance. Wooden structures creak and settle in ways that sound like footsteps or breaking and dantering. Wind through thatched roofs creates sounds that can mask approaching danger or create false alarms that keep families awake all night in unnecessary terror. Cattle lowing indicates distress that might be caused by predators, thieves, or weather changes that threaten livestock and humans alike. Medieval people didn't just hear nighttime sounds. They decoded them like a sophisticated early warning system that could mean the difference between waking up alive or not waking up at all. These aren't random noises. They're coded messages about patrol status, threat levels, and coordination between different guard posts. You learn to interpret these signals the way modern people read traffic lights, understanding immediately what each sound means for your personal safety and what actions you need to take. Winter silence indicates dangerous cold that could freeze exposed humans, while unusual winter sounds might indicate predators driven closer to human settlements by desperation. Domestic arguments might indicate families under stress who could become dangerous. Children crying at unusual hours might signal illness, abuse, or other problems that could spread to your household. Adult conversations carried on the night air often contain gossip, warnings, or information about threats that you need to know about. The night sounds of medieval Europe tell stories that modern humans have completely forgotten how to read. Dogs bark differently for strangers, wild animals, fires, and supernatural phenomena. Medieval people believed dogs could detect ghosts and demons. Sounds that are too loud for the time of night might indicate emergencies, celebrations, or criminal activities that require your attention or avoidance. Normal nighttime sounds that merchant. Monks chanting at different hours indicate specific religious observances, but they also provide time signals and assurance that spiritual authorities are maintaining their protective rituals. Because of noise, pollution, and electric lighting that makes sound less critical for survival. Well, you're about to discover that seasonal changes in daylight hours created psychological challenges that drove entire populations to the edge of madness. What's certain is that listening skills were literally matters of life and death for most of human history. Changes in religious sound patterns might indicate problems at monasteries or churches that could affect community safety and spiritual well-being. And whether or not you believe in the supernatural, dogs definitely react to things humans can't perceive. This acoustic awareness becomes so sophisticated that experienced medieval people can identify individual animals, people, and activities just by their distinctive sounds, creating a surveillance network that operates continuously without any technology. Cats behave strangely before earthquakes and storms. Roosters crow at unusual times when they sense predators or disturbances that humans miss. The particular way wind sounds through trees tells you whether you're refacing gentle breezes or dangerous gusts that could topple structures or spread fires. Rain patterns on different roof materials indicate whether you're getting light showers or dangerous downpours that could flood streets and make travel. The absence of normal trade sounds could signal economic problems, political instability, or threats that have disrupted commerce and supply lines. Communicates information about travelers, threats, or unusual activity that might affect your own safety. Spring brings specific bird migrations that indicate planting times and weather patterns. Summer insect sounds reveal crop health and disease conditions. Fall wildlife activity tells you about winter food. Church bells ring different patterns for different emergencies, fire alarms. Invasion warnings, calls for help, or time signals that help coordinate your learning to distinguish between normal nighttime, animal sounds, and the calls that indicate danger. The sound of hammering at night might indicate emergency repairs, but it could also signal criminals breaking into buildings or preparing weapons for attacks. Human-made sounds create their own communication network across the medieval landscape. Community activities. You learn to identify which church is ringing and what the specific pattern means for your family's safety. The acoustics of medieval settlements amplify and distort sounds in ways that modern people never experience. Night watchmen developed their own acoustic communication systems using horns, bells, and vocal calls that carry across villages and towns. Whether sounds become critical survival information when you can't see approaching storms or temperature changes. Lethal. Domestic animal behaviors provide real-time threat assessment that's more reliable than human guards. The soundscape of different seasons creates its own survival calendar, supplies, and weather predictions. Social sounds reveal information about your neighbors and community that affects your own safety. The volume and timing of sounds provide as much information as the sounds themselves. Suddenly stop indicates something has frightened local wildlife, possibly predators, criminals, or other threats. Religious sounds create their own communication network across medieval communities. Trade and travel sounds provide information about economic conditions and security situations. Caravans traveling at unusual hours might indicate dangerous conditions on regular routes. You develop the ability to create a mental map of your surroundings based purely on sound. Understanding exactly what's happening within a several-mile radius of your home. The psychological comfort of familiar night sounds helps medieval families cope with the stress of nighttime dangers. Regular, predictable noises indicate normal conditions where threats are manageable. It's the absence of normal sounds or the presence of unusual noises that creates anxiety and triggers survival responses that keep families alive. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually had better hearing than modern humans, or if they simply developed acoustic skills that we've lost to remember that expensive lighting we discussed and those segmented sleep patterns. You're living in Northern Europe during December, and the sun sets at 3:30 in the afternoon. By 4 p.m., you're facing 16 hours of complete darkness with no electric lights, no television, no internet, no distractions from the crushing weight of endless night. You're not just dealing with inconvenience, you're confronting a psychological torture that drove entire populations to depression, madness, and behaviors that seem incomprehensible to modern humans who have never experienced true seasonal darkness. Families burn their furniture for light and heat, not because they can't afford firewood, but because the psychological need for illumination overrides rational resource management. People risk their lives traveling to neighbors, door houses just to be around other humans, and share the burden of enduring darkness together. Well, in winter, you're trying to maintain that rhythm when there's barely 8 hours of daylight total. Your circadian rhythms become medieval winter depression. Wasn't just sadness about cold weather. Doctors prescribe light therapy, using polished metal mirrors to reflect whatever sunlight is available into patients' homes. Herbal remedies target symptoms we now know are caused by vitamin D deficiency and disrupted brain chemistry. Whether these treatments worked or not, they demonstrate that medieval people understood seasonal darkness as a medical emergency. You're facing what modern medicine calls seasonal affective disorder, except with none of the treatments, understanding, or coping. But medieval people had no idea why they felt suicidal, violent, or completely hopeless during winter months. They just knew that darkness made people crazy. It's mechanisms that make it manageable today. Your brain chemistry is literally changing as daylight disappears, reducing serotonin and melatonin production in ways that create genuine mental illness. The combination of sleep deprivation, depression, and sensory deprivation creates cognitive impairment that makes medieval communities essentially non-functional for weeks or months at a time. Domestic violence increases as people trap together in small, dark spaces. For months develop cabin fever that escalates minor conflicts into life-threatening situations. Their developing brains require consistent light exposure for normal growth, and prolonged darkness creates learning disabilities, behavioral problems, and failure to thrive that affects them for life. Women often cope better with indoor confinement because their social roles prepare them for domestic activities. While men struggle more with the loss of outdoor work and mobility, people die from accidents that seem suspiciously convenient, disappear during winter storms. Medieval spring festivals involve levels of celebration and release that indicate just or succumb to sudden illnesses that modern analysis suggests were actually deaths by despair. Entire families sometimes die together during winter months in ways that suggest coordinated suicide pacts. Wealthy families can afford more candles, better heating, and larger social gatherings. But they still face the same fundamental brain chemistry changes that darkness creates. Poor families suffer more severely, but the basic psychological challenges affect everyone regardless of economic status. However, medieval families develop elaborate games, stories, activities specifically designed to keep children. It's mentally stimulated when environmental conditions make normal development impossible. Winter religious festivals focus on light symbolism, hope, and community gatherings specifically to combat the despair that darkness creates. What's clear is that seasonal darkness created psychological challenges that shaped entire cultures and explained many behaviors that seem bizarre when viewed from our electrically lit perspective. Well, you're about to discover that the supernatural fears of medieval people, these are in just spiritual observances. They re-community mental health interventions designed to keep people functional during the most psychologically dangerous time of year. Entire villages experience collective mental health crises where normal social rules break down because everyone is operating under the psychological stress of sensory deprivation combined with survival anxiety. Murder rates spike during winter months, not just because of economic desperation, but because darkness literally drives people insane. The psychological impact of extreme seasonal darkness creates behaviors that seem bizarre until you understand the desperation behind them. People dance, feast, and engage in activities that suggest they literally celebrating their survival of what amounts to months of psychological torture. Medieval brewing increases dramatically before winter, not just because fermented beverages are safer than water, but because alcohol provides temporary relief from the psychological torture of endless night. Of course, this creates its own problems as alcoholism compounds the existing mental health crisis. You develop what medieval texts call winter madness, a genuine psychiatric condition where prolonged darkness triggers hallucinations, paranoia, and violent outbursts. The sleep disruption caused by extreme seasonal light changes compounds every other psychological problem. Remember those segmented sleep patterns? Completely scrambled, creating chronic fatigue, depression, cognitive impairment that makes rational decision-making nearly impossible. Medieval medicine recognizes seasonal darkness as a legitimate health threat with specific treatments that seem primitive, but actually address real physiological problems. The social dynamics of winter communities change dramatically as darkness becomes the dominant environmental factor. Families huddle together not just for warmth but for psychological support against the crushing isolation of endless night. Religious practices adapt to address the psychological needs of people facing seasonal darkness. Alcohol consumption skyrockets during winter months as people attempt to self-medicate against depression and anxiety caused by seasonal darkness. Economic activity nearly stops during the darkest winter months, not just because of weather conditions, but because people become psychologically incapable of complex planning and decision-making. Children suffer particularly severe psychological damage from extreme seasonal darkness. The gender dynamics of seasonal darkness reveal how differently men and women experience psychological stress. Women face additional psychological pressure as primary caregivers for families experiencing collective mental health crises. Suicide rates increase dramatically during the darkest months, though medieval records don't always identify suicide explicitly because of religious prohibitions. The psychological relief of spring's return creates its own set of behaviors that seem extreme to modern observers. How severe the winter psychological trauma really was. Different social classes experience seasonal darkness differently, but no one escapes its psychological impact entirely. The cumulative effect of experiencing extreme seasonal darkness year after year creates permanent psychological changes in medieval populations. People develop anxiety disorders, chronic depression, and behavioral patterns that seem irrational, until you understand they are coping mechanisms for surviving repeated exposure to conditions that are literally torture by modern human rights standards. Historians still argue whether medieval people were more psychologically resilient than modern humans, or if they simply had no choice but to endure conditions that would hospitalize modern people within weeks. Remember those criminals who owned the darkness and the night sounds that told stories? Weren't just superstition, they were rational responses to psychological and environmental conditions that genuinely created terrifying experiences. You're lying in your medieval bed during that winter madness we just discussed, and suddenly you see something moving in the shadows that shouldn't be there. Your rational mind knows it's probably just the interplay of firelight and darkness, but you're sleep-deprived, vitamin D deficient, psychologically stressed medieval brain is absolutely convinced you're looking at a demon. And here's the terrifying part. Given the conditions you're living under, that hallucination might actually be more dangerous than a real supernatural entity. Medieval ghost stories weren't just entertainment, they were rational. Responses to environmental conditions that genuinely created terrifying experiences. When you're suffering from chronic sleep deprivation, malnutrition, seasonal depression, and constant stress, your brain starts producing hallucinations that are indistinguishable from reality. Your blood sugar is at its lowest. Your core body temperature has added in the effects of ergot poisoning from contaminated grain, carbon monoxide exposure from poorly ventilated fires. When everyone believes that ghosts, demons, and evil spirits are genuine threats, the fear itself becomes genuinely dangerous. People make life or death decisions based on supernatural beliefs, avoiding certain areas at night, refusing to help strangers, or engaging in protective behaviors that sometimes cause more harm than the imaginary threats they redesigned to prevent. And the psychological pressure of endless darkness, and you've got a perfect recipe for supernatural experiences that feel absolutely real. The witching hour between midnight and 3 a.m. is unjust poetic timing. When human physiology is most vulnerable to hallucinations and psychological breakdown, werewolf legends emerge in regions with actual wolf populations that threaten human settlements. Supernatural experiences increase during periods of high stress, food scarcity, disease outbreaks, and extreme weather-all conditions that actually do increase both hallucinations. Medieval people weren't wrong to believe that certain times and conditions made supernatural encounters more likely. They were just using supernatural explanations for real cause and effect relationships. They observed, but couldn't explain scientifically. Medieval explanations for these gender differences involve supernatural entities that specifically target women. But modern understanding suggests these stories reflect real differences in how men and women experience psychological stress and neurological phenomena. Ghost stories often describe spirits that behave suspiciously like human criminals appearing in predictable locations, targeting specific types of victims and disappearing when confronted by groups or authority figures, which makes sense when you consider that children are most vulnerable to real nighttime dangers and need psychological comfort to cope with terror that could literally traumatize them for life. Poor communities report more supernatural encounters, not because they're more superstitious, but because poverty creates malnutrition, stress, and environmental conditions that genuinely increase hallucinations and psychological breakdown. Wealthy communities develop different types of supernatural beliefs that reflect their different environmental conditions and social stresses. They understand that not every supernatural claim represents actual spiritual phenomena, and medieval parents encourage belief in protective supernatural entities, not because they're superstitious, but because these beliefs provide psychological tools that help children survive genuinely dangerous conditions. What's clear is that the psychological and environmental conditions of pre-electric nighttime created experiences that were terrifying regardless of whether supernatural explanations were accurate. Medieval doctors recognized that certain illnesses, dietary problems, and environmental conditions make people more susceptible to supernatural encounters. Even if their explanations involve supernatural rather than neurological causes, well, you're about to discover that women faced all the same nighttime dangers as men, plus a whole additional category of threats that made darkness exponentially more. Mountain regions develop supernatural explanations for altitude sickness, weather changes, and avalanche risks. Dropped, and your brain is cycling through sleep stages that make you susceptible to waking dreams and false perceptions. Coastal regions develop stories about sea spirits and ghost ships that correspond to real maritime dangers and weather phenomena. Forest communities create neighbors check on each other during nights when supernatural activity is believed to be high, providing actual human protection against real criminals and dangers. Religious authorities offer counsel and support for people experiencing what they believe are supernatural attacks. It's providing mental health services disguised as spiritual intervention. Medieval people who reported seeing ghosts, demons, or supernatural phenomena during these hours were probably experiencing genuine neurological events caused by the harsh conditions of pre-electric nighttime. You're lying in bed, fully conscious but unable to move, while your brain creates vivid hallucinations of threatening figures, pressing down on your chest or lurking in the shadows of your room. Medieval people called this pinning or being hag-ridden, and they developed elaborate protective rituals and explanations that make perfect sense when you realize sleep paralysis becomes a genuinely terrifying experience when you don't understand the medical explanation. They're dealing with a real neurological phenomenon without any scientific framework to understand it. The psychological power of supernatural beliefs creates its own reality in medieval communities. Medieval protective rituals against supernatural threats reveal sophisticated understanding of psychological comfort and community support. Even if the explanations are supernatural rather than scientific, blessing houses, carrying, protective amulets, and performing group prayers provide genuine psychological relief that helps people cope with the terror of nighttime in ways that are actually effective. Regardless of whether the supernatural explanations are true, the social dynamics of supernatural belief create community networks that provide real safety benefits. Different types of supernatural entities reflect different categories of real nighttime dangers. Stories about vampires and blood-drinking creatures correlate with areas where disease, malnutrition, and violence create actual peril. Weak, desperate people who might attack others for resources. The timing of supernatural encounters follows patterns that match real psychological and environmental vulnerabilities and real dangers. Women experience supernatural encounters differently than men, partly because their social roles expose them to different nighttime dangers, and partly because hormonal cycles affect susceptibility to certain types of hallucinations. Children's supernatural experiences often involve protective spirits and guardian angels. The geographical distribution of different supernatural beliefs correlates with environmental factors that create specific types of real experiences. Legends about woodland spirits that reflect real encounters with wildlife and the psychological effects of dense forest environments. Economic factors influence supernatural beliefs in ways that reveal how poverty and desperation create conditions that make supernatural experiences more likely. The medical understanding of supernatural experiences in medieval times actually includes some surprisingly accurate observations about the relationship between physical health and psychological phenomena. Religious authorities developed sophisticated systems for distinguishing between genuine supernatural experiences and medical or psychological problems, creating diagnostic criteria that are remarkably similar to modern psychiatric evaluation methods. Develop procedures for identifying and treating what they recognize as medical conditions disguised as supernatural experiences. Historians still argue whether medieval supernatural beliefs were primarily cultural constructions or rational responses to environmental conditions that genuinely created experiences that seemed supernatural. Remember that winter madness and those night sounds that told stories? Dangerous for half the population. You're a medieval woman stepping outside your house after dark, and every single danger we've discussed so far just doubled. Those criminals who own the night, they specifically target women because they know you're less likely to fight back effectively and more likely to be carrying valuable items like jewelry or household goods. Sexual assault becomes exponentially more likely in darkness when attackers coo and be identified and victims coo and see escape routes. But medieval sexual violence isn't just about individual criminals. It's about systematic exploitation that uses darkness as a weapon against women, who already have limited legal protections and social power. Medieval women's fashion is essentially designed to make them vulnerable, and darkness amplifies every disadvantage. That supernatural terror from the winter madness, it hits women harder because hormonal cycles make you more susceptible to hallucinations and psychological breakdown. That expensive lighting we can't afford. Well, as a woman, you're probably not even allowed to control the family's candle budget. making you dependent on male relatives for basic men, can continue some forms of work by feel or firelight. But women's detailed handwork becomes impossible without adequate illumination. This means women lose income-generating capacity during the hours when expenses for light and fuel actually increase, creating economic pressure that forces them into dangerous nighttime activities. Safety resources. Medieval women trapped in abusive households face intensified violence during the long winter nights when families are confined together in small spaces for extended periods. You're managing sick children, elderly relatives, and disabled family members who need constant attention during the hours when providing that care becomes most difficult and dangerous. Stories about evil spirits that steal babies, demons that attack women during childbirth, and supernatural entities that prey on women traveling alone aren't just misogyny. Medieval women often exhaust themselves trying to meet caregiving responsibilities that are genuinely impossible under nighttime conditions. The isolation that darkness creates makes it impossible for women to seek help or escape from situations that are literally killing them. But because the economic desperation that drives women into sex work intensifies during winter months when other income sources disappear, medieval legal systems that barely protect women during daylight essentially abandon them entirely after dark. Medieval women are prohibited from carrying weapons that might save their lives, trained to be passive in dangerous situations, and socialized to depend on help that frequently doesn't come when they need it most. Women who might survive occasional prostitution during daylight hours often die from increased violence and health. Risks that nighttime sex work creates in medieval urban environments, convents, churches, and other religious facilities that should offer sanctuary sometimes become sites where women face exploitation by religious authorities, who know their crimes woe and be discovered or reported in darkness. You're not supposed to travel alone, speak to strangers, or make independent decisions about your safety, but nighttime you're going into labor at 2 a.m. in complete darkness, and your family needs to locate a midwife, gather supplies, and manage a medical emergency without being able to see what they're doing. Women die from medical conditions that would be treatable during daylight simply because darkness makes healthcare inaccessible. Medieval women is nervous or hysterical. Behavior makes perfect sense when you understand they re-exhibiting rational responses to environmental conditions that are actually trying to kill them. Medieval women are essentially forced to choose between economic survival and physical safety in ways that men rarely face. And limited social power created unique dangers that modern women can fully understand. What's certain is that medieval nighttime created a level of systematic vulnerability for women that shaped every aspect of their lives and survival strategies. You're isolated from the other women who understand your situation and might provide assistance, making nighttime crises into solitary struggles against overwhelming odds. Medieval women often die from following social rules that prevent them from taking actions that would save their lives, choosing social compliance over survival in ways that seem insane. Until you understand the consequences of violating gender expectations, medieval obstetric mortality rates spike at night not just because of medical complications, but because darkness makes it impossible to provide adequate care during the most dangerous moments. Medieval women face what criminologists now call layered victimization. Every existing danger affects them more severely. Plus, they face additional threats that men don't experience at all. The clothing that medieval women wear makes nighttime navigation genuinely deadly. Your long skirts and robes that seemed appropriate during daylight now become tripping hazards that could kill you. You're trying to run from attackers while managing layers of heavy fabric that catch on everything, slow your movement, and make it impossible to climb, hide, or defend yourself effectively. Pregnancy and childbirth create nighttime emergencies where women's survival depends on getting help in conditions that make assistance nearly impossible to find. Of childbirth, women's economic vulnerability increases dramatically after dark because their typical occupations, textile work, food preparation, childcare, all require vision that darkness eliminates. The social restrictions placed on women during daylight hours become life-threatening constraints in darkness. Emergencies require exactly these prohibited behaviors. Domestic violence escalates dramatically during nighttime hours when privacy and darkness provide cover for abuse that would be visible or audible during daylight. Women's roles as primary caregivers mean they're responsible for family members who become more vulnerable and demanding during nighttime hours. The supernatural beliefs we discussed earlier specifically target women with threats and explanations that reflect their unique vulnerabilities. Disguised as folklore, they're cultural acknowledgments that women face genuine dangers that men don't experience, even if the explanations are supernatural rather than sociological. Medieval prostitution becomes exponentially more dangerous after dark, not just because of criminal predators. The limited legal protections available to medieval women become even more meaningless in darkness when crimes couldn't be witnessed. Victims can't identify attackers, and authorities are reluctant to investigate incidents that occurred during hours when everyone knows dangers increase. Women's access to weapons and self-defense. Training is limited by social conventions that assume men will provide protection, but those protective men often aren't available during nighttime emergencies. The psychological impact of constant nighttime vulnerability creates what modern psychology would recognize as chronic trauma symptoms in medieval women. You develop hypervigilance, anxiety disorders, and behavioral patterns designed to minimize risks that are genuinely life-threatening. Religious institutions that provide some protection for women during daylight hours often become more dangerous at night when they are less supervised and more isolated. The health care available to medieval women deteriorates dramatically. During nighttime hours, when female healers and midwives are reluctant to travel to patients, male physicians refuse to treat women in private settings, and families can't transport women to medical care safely. Economic opportunities for women often involve nighttime activities: brewing, baking, textile work that requires long hours, but these occupations expose them to additional risks without providing adequate compensation for the increased dangers. The social networks that help women survive during daylight hours break down at night. When travel becomes too dangerous for the mutual support that medieval women's communities depend on, historians still argue whether medieval women were more vulnerable than women in other historical periods, or if the combination of darkness. Remember those supernatural terrors and the winter madness that drove people to psychological breakdown? Well, you're about to discover that children faced all these same horrors while their developing brains are still learning to distinguish reality from nightmare. You're tucked beneath rough woolen blankets in a medieval cottage, listening to your mother's voice, weave tales of hungry wolves and clever children who outwitted them. But these aren't just bedtime stories, they're survival manuals disguised as entertainment. Every fairy tale, every lullaby, every whispered prayer carries practical wisdom about navigating the dangers that lurk beyond your thin wooden walls. Children's bedtime in the pre-electric world wasn't about comfort. was about preparation for a night that could easily become your last. Your mother begins with the familiar rhythm of Little Red Riding Hood, but pay attention to the details she emphasizes. The girl who strays from the path, who talks to strangers, who fails to recognize danger, these aren't random plot points. They're warnings encoded in story form, teaching you to stay alert, trust your instincts. Your mother places iron objects near the windows not to ward off fairies, but because iron tools make excellent weapons and the metal's distinctive smell can mask human scent from wild animals, she burns specific herbs that supposedly keep evil spirits away, though the real Rockabye Baby might sound gentle to modern ears. But listen to the words of Baby in a treetop, falling when the wind blows. The crosses above doorways aren't just religious symbols. They reposition to catch moonlight and create shadows that might confuse potential intruders about the room's layout. By reciting the same words every night, children developed mental discipline and the ability to focus under stress. The repetitive nature of these rituals created neural pathways that would serve them well in crisis situations. When panic could mean the difference between life and death, some historians believe these prayer traditions evolved specifically to train young minds for survival thinking. Your mother helps you arrange your clothes so you can dress quickly in darkness, teaching you to recognize each garment by touch alone. Winter nights bring different preparations than summer evenings, different stories that emphasize cold weather survival, different protective measures against the unique. She shows you how to tie knots that won't slip, how to open and close latches silently, how to move across creaky floors without making noise. These skills weren't optional. They were survival requirements for any child who hoped to reach adulthood. The same patient instruction in the art of surviving darkness. Sweet dreams were not just a pleasant wish. They were a prayer that you'd live to see another dawn. This is just a bedtime routine. It's a comprehensive education system designed to keep you alive long enough to pass the same knowledge to your own children. Every story, every song, every whispered prayer is a gift from generations of ancestors who learned these lessons through tragedy and triumph. Your parents taught you to distinguish between the normal sounds of a settling house and the deliberate footsteps of something or someone moving with purpose. They showed you how to breathe silently, how to remain perfectly still even when terrified, how to remember landmarks in complete darkness so you could find hiding places or escape routes without fumbling. These lullabies prepared children for a world where death was always one misstep away, where even the safest places could become dangerous without warning. They teach you the art of controlled fear, showing you how to stay alert without becoming paralyzed by anxiety. This knowledge wasn't written. It teaches you the proper way to bank the fire. So it woe and die completely, but woe and spread to the thatched roof. These aren't chores. They're life skills as essential as learning to walk or speak. Every child who survived to adulthood had mastered these nighttime protocols. Historians still argue whether these dark themes were intentionally educational or simply reflected the harsh realities of medieval life. But their survival value is, and never underestimate the predators that hunt in darkness. The wolf isn't just a mythical beast. It's every real threat that prowls outside your door when the sun disappears. The songs your parents sing aren't merely soothing melodies. Undeniable. Your father joins the ritual. It's demonstrating how to check the door bolts, how to listen for unusual sounds, how to identify which creaking floorboards might signal an intruder. The protective rituals seem almost magical, but they're rooted in practical wisdom. purpose is repelling insects that carry disease and rats that spread plague. You learn to sleep with one ear always listening, a skill that took months to develop but became as automatic as breathing. The bedtime prayers weren't just spiritual comfort. They were memory exercises. Your older siblings share their own nighttime wisdom, which spots in the house stay warmest, or to position yourself to hear danger approaching from multiple directions, how to interpret the different calls of night birds that might signal human presence down anywhere. It passed from parent to child through countless generations of careful instruction. The bedtime ritual includes practical preparations disguised as games. You notice how your parents' bedtime routine changes with the seasons. Dangers of each season. The flexibility of these rituals taught children to adapt their survival strategies to changing circumstances. Crucial skill in an unpredictable world. As you finally drift towards sleep, you'll understand that tomorrow night will bring the same careful preparations, the same encoded warnings. The last thing you hear before sleep claims you as your mother's voice, soft but serious, reminding you that the darkness outside is real. The dangers are genuine, but you've been given the tools to survive them. You slip through the narrow alleyways of a Tudor-era city, following the shadowy figures who emerge only when respectable citizens have barricaded themselves indoors. This is the world of night workers, a strange economy that thrives in darkness, where certain professions not only survived but flourished under the cover of night. These aren't just insomniacs making the best of their sleeplessness. They're specialized craftspeople, merchants, and service providers who discovered that darkness offered unique opportunities unavailable in daylight. Your first stop is a blacksmith's forge, where the glow of red-hot metal illuminates the sweating face of a man who prefers to work when the rest of the world sleeps. Nightsmiths weren't uncommon. The heat from their forges was unbearable during summer days, but the cool night air made the work tolerable. You watched them move through the streets with their carts, collecting human waste from private homes and public latrines. These men knew every back alley, every hidden entrance, every shortcut through the urban maze. These weren't casual anglers. They were professionals who understood that different species had different feeding patterns. Some of the most valuable catches could only be made after sunset. Before telegraph systems, these professionals filled a crucial role in commerce and diplomacy. They knew every safe route between cities, every inn that would provide fresh horses or meals at unusual hours, every landmark that could be identified by moonlight. The most skilled night messengers could maintain higher speeds than daytime couriers, because they faced less traffic and could use shortcuts that were too dangerous during busy daylight hours. These weren't necessarily illegal activities, but they operated under different rules. Night markets often featured goods that were perfectly legal, but socially controversial: certain medicines, books, tools, or foods that river fishing in particular was more productive at night. When the water was cooler and industrial activities had ceased, these fishermen developed specialized techniques for working by touch and sound. Skills that made them you watch them tend to patients who can't afford to miss work during daylight hours, or who suffer from conditions that require treatments best administered in darkness. Some specialize in mental ailments, believing that night's natural quietness enhances healing. They created their own apprenticeship systems, their own methods for training new members, their own traditions for celebrating professional achievements. The night workers retreat to their hidden sleeping quarters. Their specialized tools are stored away, and the evidence of their activities disappears. By full daylight, the city looks completely normal, but you now understand that an entire parallel civilization operates in the hours when most people sleep, maintaining services and meeting needs that the daylight world couldn't accommodate. See how these workers developed their own social structures, their own gathering places, their own methods for sharing information and resources? They created networks that spanned entire regions, connecting night workers in unlike daytime guilds, which were often regulated by city authorities. Night guilds operated with more independence and flexibility. Others focus on treatments that require precise timing with lunar cycles or stellar. Positions knowledge that seems mystical now but was considered scientific in their era. They formed tight-knit groups, often passing their roots down through families like inherited territories. This work could only happen at night, partly to avoid the more importantly. The sound of hammering on anvils wouldn't disturb paying customers who demanded quiet neighborhoods. These smiths often commanded higher prices for their discretion, crafting everything from horseshoes to weapons for clients who had reasons to avoid daytime transactions. You follow the scent of baking bread to a narrow shop where night bakers labor over you. Observe their carefully choreographed patrols, their coded signals, their methods massive ovens. Their work begins at midnight. They were the backbone of urban safety, trained in everything from basic medicine to fire suppression. Historians still argue whether night watchmen were more effective than modern police forces. Their intimate knowledge of their territories made them formidable opponents for anyone who threatened community safety, ensuring fresh loaves are ready when markets open at dawn. But not all night bakers serve the legitimate morning trade. Some specialize in black market goods bread baked with expensive white flour for wealthy clients who do want one of their neighbors knowing about their luxurious diet, or special loaves that hide messages or small valuables for secretive exchanges. The guild system tried to regulate these nocturnal entrepreneurs, but darkness made enforcement nearly impossible. The night soil men represent perhaps the most essential yet invisible profession of the pre-electric world. Obvious social embarrassment, but also because daytime heat made the job unbearable and potentially deadly. Your path crosses with the night fishermen, who discovered that certain fish bite better in darkness, invaluable to communities that depended on fresh protein. You encounter the night messengers, riders, and runners, who specialized in urgent communications that couldn't wait for daylight. The night watch represents the most organized of these darkness professions. For communicating across long distances without alerting criminals to their presence, these weren't just security guards. You discover the night market's hidden economies where goods changed hands outside the regulation of daylight commerce. Respectable citizens preferred to purchase discreetly. The vendors who worked these markets developed their own codes, their own methods of quality control, their own systems for resolving disputes. The night healers practice a different kind of medicine than their daytime counterparts. You witness the formation of night guilds, professional associations that operated outside the traditional craft systems. These groups provided mutual support, shared knowledge, and maintained quality standards for their unusual specialties. The night economy wasn't just about individual professions. It was about entire communities that adapted to darkness, different cities, and enabling them to coordinate their activities across vast distances. As dawn approaches, you watch this shadow economy dissolve like mist. You stand in a moonlit field, holding a simple wooden stick called a cross staff, learning to navigate by the same celestial map that guided your ancestors for thousands of years. Above you, the stars aren't just pretty lights, they're a precise navigation system, cosmic clock, and a seasonal calendar all rolled into one. Every farmer, sailor, traveler, and merchant who lived before electric light possessed astronomical knowledge that would impress modern scientists. You're about to discover how losing this connection to the night sky made humanity more vulnerable and dependent than we've ever been. Your first lesson begins with Polaris, the North Star, which sits almost motionless in the northern sky, while every other star appears to rotate around it. You learn to find it by following the pointer stars in the Big Dipper, a technique so reliable that it worked anywhere in the northern hemisphere. But this isn't just about the constellation Cassiopeia, with its distinctive W shape, serves as a backup. Finding North Polaris tells you your latitude with remarkable accuracy. These weren't just useful skills. They were essential survival knowledge for anyone who traveled beyond familiar territory. The new moon provided the darkest nights for military operations or secretive activities, while the full moon offered maximum illumination for essential nighttime work. You learn to predict weather patterns by observing stellar visibility. Clear twinkling stars indicate stable atmospheric conditions, while fuzzy or dim stars suggest approaching storms. The color of stars near the horizon reveals humidity levels and air pressure changes. These observations were so reliable that experienced travelers could forecast weather days in advance, information that could mean the difference between life and death for anyone caught in the open. These observations were crucial for timing arrivals at destinations, planning rest stops, or preparing for activities that required daylight. The ability to accurately predict sunrise from several hours away was a survival skill that separated. You learn how different civilizations created their own constellation patterns, their own mythologies, their own methods for teaching celestial navigation to children. The same stars that guided Greek sailors carried different meanings for Arab traders, African herders, or Native American hunters. The full extent of pre-electric astronomical knowledge may be lost forever, buried with the civilizations that developed it. Yet the underlying mathematical relationships remained constant, creating a universal language that transcended cultural boundaries. Farmers used lunar cycles to time planting and harvesting, believing that plant growth followed celestial rhythms. Modern research suggests some of these beliefs: the spatial reasoning, the mathematical intuition, the sensory awareness necessary for stellar navigation, represent cognitive skills that electric civilization has made obsolete. You're not just learning to read stars, you're recovering lost human capabilities that once made our species remarkably self-sufficient and independent. The angle between Polaris and the horizon directly corresponds to your distance from the equator, giving you one crucial coordinate of your position without any instruments beyond your own hand measurements. We traded celestial independence for technological dependence, stellar wisdom for artificial illumination. As you pack away your cross-staff and prepare for the final lessons of pre-electric night, you wonder whether this you practice using your fist and fingers as measuring tools, discovering that these body parts maintain consistent angular relationships to celestial objects regardless of your actual hand size. Some megalithic structures demonstrate mathematical precision that seems impossible without. Your fist held at arm's length spans about 10 degrees of sky, while your thumb covers roughly 2 degrees. These measurements allowed people to determine precise star positions, calculate time until sunrise, and estimate distances to landmarks. Light pollution doesn't just hide stars. It eliminates the natural rhythms that regulated human behavior for millennia. The loss of star knowledge represents more than just forgotten navigation skills. It's the disappearance of a fundamental human relationship with the cosmos that shaped our ancestors' understanding of time, space, and their place in the universe. You learn to read the star patterns like a sophisticated timepiece, understanding how stellar positions shift 4 minutes earlier each night, creating a year-long cycle that ancient peoples tracked with astonishing precision. People who mastered these skills could navigate across trackless wilderness or open ocean with accuracy that rivals modern GPS systems. The loss of these abilities represents one of the most significant losses of practical intelligence in human history. The same stars that rise at midnight in January appear at sunset in July, providing a celestial calendar that never required maintenance or adjustment. The human body was the world's most portable and reliable measuring device, always available when mechanical instruments failed or were lost. The constellation you know as Orion becomes your winter clock, its position telling you not just the hour but the precise date. Your navigation instructor, perhaps an old sailor or experienced trader, teaches you the secrets of stellar navigation that were once common knowledge. Compass, when Polaris is obscured by clouds. The Southern Cross guides travelers in the southern hemisphere, while the Pleiades cluster indicates the beginning of various agricultural seasons across different cultures. You discover how the phases of the moon created a natural monthly calendar that coordinated human activities across vast distances. Had scientific basis, particularly regarding tidal effects on soil moisture and plant biology. The practical applications of star knowledge extend far beyond navigation. Your stellar education includes the art of dead reckoning, calculating your position by combining star observations with estimates of speed and direction traveled. This complex mental mathematics required constant practice and remarkable spatial reasoning abilities. You practice reading the subtle signs that indicate approaching dawn, the gradual fading of certain stars, shifting colors of the eastern horizon, the changing behavior of nocturnal animals, experienced travelers from dangerous amateurs. The star knowledge wasn't just practical, it was deeply cultural and spiritual. Historians still argue whether ancient peoples possessed more sophisticated astronomical knowledge than historical records suggest. Advanced instruments. While certain traditional navigation techniques produce results that challenge our understanding of what's possible with naked eye observation, you begin to understand how electric lighting severed humanity's connection to the night sky. As you continue practicing with your cross staff, measuring star positions, and calculating your location, you realize that this ancient knowledge required mental abilities that most modern humans have never developed. The irony becomes clear in gaining electric light. Humanity lost the ability to navigate by natural light. Its exchange was worth the price we paid. You've survived another night in the pre-electric world, and now you experience something that modern humans rarely feel: the profound, almost religious relief that comes with the first hint of dawn. Your body, which has been tense with vigilance for hours, finally begins to relax as the eastern horizon shows the faintest suggestion of light. This isn't just another sunrise. Salvation, deliverance, and rebirth all rolled into one glorious moment. You're about to understand why dawn held such powerful meaning for our ancestors, and why surviving the night was never taken for granted. Your breathing becomes deeper, your shoulders drop from their defensive posture, and muscles you didn't realize were clenched finally relax. The hypervigilance that kept you alive through the dark hours gradually gives way to a different kind of awareness, still alert. But no longer expecting death to emerge, the darkness begins its retreat gradually. The stars fade one by one, This daily victory of light over darkness held profound meaning for people who understood viscerally that darkness meant danger, and light meant safety. The sunrise wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It was a daily miracle that allowed life to continue. You understand now why so many ancient cultures worshipped sun gods, why dawn prayers were universal across different civilizations, why the return of light was celebrated as a sacred event. This wasn't primitive superstition. It was practical recognition that darkness brought real dangers and light brought real safety. Every sunrise was a gift that enabled another day of life. Almost imperceptibly, you notice it first in the behavior of the night sounds. The owl's calls become less frequent. You hear the creak of doors opening, the splash of water being drawn from wells. The clatter, the rustling of nocturnal animals shifts to a different rhythm, and somewhere in the distance, the first rooster announces the coming victory of light over darkness. The relief of dawn wasn't just about escaping imagined threats. It was about surviving real dangers that darkness concealed. Wild animals, human predators, environmental hazards, and simple accidents all posed greater risks in darkness, making sunrise a legitimate cause for celebration. These aren't just routine morning sounds. They're the sounds of life resuming, of civilization awakening, of another day's opportunities beginning. Each sound represents a victory over the night's attempt to stop human progress and productivity. Now you notice how the temperature begins to rise, not dramatically, but enough to ease the bone-deep chill that settles into your body during the coldest, darkest hours before dawn. You feel the last of the night's tension drained from your body, replaced by energy and optimism for the day ahead. This is the moment of complete deliverance. Night is defeated, darkness is banished, and the world it was salvation. Arriving punctually every morning to rescue humanity from the darkness that threatened to consume it. Every sunrise was a promise that no matter how dark the night became, light would always return to save those who managed to survive until its arrival. This subtle warming feels like a promise the sun's life-giving energy is returning to banish the cold death of night. These weren't just religious observances. They were psychological and social mechanisms for processing the stress of surviving another night and preparing for another day's challenges. The transition from night to day marked one of the most important boundaries in human experience, the boundary between vulnerability and capability, between fear and hope. Shadows that concealed potential threats throughout the night gradually disappear, replaced by the familiar shapes of trees, buildings, and pathways. You can finally see the world clearly, identify safe routes, spot any dangers that might have approached during the darkness. Your eyes, adapted to the faint starlight, detect the subtle change in the sky's color from deep black to the darkest blue. This is the moment when night begins to lose its grip on the world. Their faces show the same relief, the same gratitude, the same quiet celebration of another night survived. Neighbors greet each other with special warmth, sharing the unspoken understanding that they've all made it through another period of vulnerability. These morning interactions carried deeper meaning than simple politeness. They were acknowledgments of shared survival, celebrations of communal endurance through the dangerous hours. You feel the physical changes in your own body as dawn approaches. From every shadow, your ancestors experienced this same physiological transformation every morning, a daily reminder of how much energy it takes to survive in darkness. The first birds join the dawn chorus, their songs creating a symphony of survival that announces the retreat of night's dangers. You learn to distinguish between the different calls some birds sing to claim territory, others to locate mates, but all contribute to the growing celebration of another night survived. These aren't just pretty sounds, they're nature's all-clear signal indicating that the predators and threats of darkness are retreating to their hiding places. You watch the horizon transform from black to deep blue to purple to pink. Each color change marking another stage in the defeat of night. Not because they've stopped shining, but because the sun's approaching light overwhelms their faint glow. The air itself changes as dawn approaches. The oppressive stillness of deep night gives way to gentle breezes that carry the sense of dew-covered grass and awakening earth. Your gratitude for this daily deliverance runs deeper than modern humans can fully comprehend. The landscape around you begins to reveal itself as the light strengthens. Visual clarity isn't just convenient, it's the difference between vulnerability and security, between helplessness and control. You notice how dawn affects other people emerging from their nighttime shelters. The sounds of human activity begin to replace the sounds of night, of tools being gathered for the day's work. Historians still argue whether our ancestors' fear of darkness was primarily psychological or based on genuine physical dangers, but the evidence suggests both factors played important roles. You begin to understand why so many cultural traditions focused on dawn rituals, morning prayers, and sunrise ceremonies. The full sun finally appears above the horizon, casting its golden light across the landscape and warming your face with its life-giving rays, belongs to the living once again. As you prepare to begin another day's activities, you carry with you the profound understanding that dawn was never just a pre-natural phenomenon. You stand at the precise moment when human civilization crosses its most dramatic threshold, the installation of the first electric streetlight. The year is 1879, and you're watching Thomas Edison's "This Isn't Just Technological Progress." It's the moment when thousands of years of human adaptation to darkness becomes obsolete in a single flash of artificial light. Unlike candles or oil lamps, this electric illumination doesn't flicker, doesn't smoke, doesn't threaten to ignite surrounding materials, and doesn't require constant attention. It simply exists, steady and reliable, pushing back the darkness with an intensity that makes moonlight seem pathetic by comparison. You realize that you're witnessing the end of one kind of human existence and the birth of another. Fundamentally different way of living. Incandescent bulb flickered to life in Menlo Park, New Jersey, casting its steady glow into what was once impenetrable darkness. The light itself seems almost magical after experiencing the pre-electric world. Factories can operate around the clock, increasing productivity, but also creating new forms of labor exploitation. The natural rhythm of sunrise and sunset that once regulated human activity becomes merely a suggestion rather than a mandatory schedule. Electric streetlights eliminate the hiding places that criminals and wild animals once used, making cities safer but also less mysterious. The careful architecture of the pre-electric world buildings, designed to maximize natural light, streets planned to accommodate torch-carrying pedestrians, becomes unnecessary as artificial illumination makes every space equally visible at any hour. Night shift workers emerge as a new class of people, living in artificial time zones that this single invention will make obsolete nearly every skill, tradition, and adaptation that helped humans survive the night for millennia. Children growing up in electric cities never developed the star-reading skills that were once as basic as literacy. And buildings can be constructed with interior spaces that would have been uninhabitable in the pre-electric world. The entire science of architecture adapts to accommodate artificial illumination. creating new possibilities for human habitation, but also new forms of environmental disconnect. Streets that were once abandoned after sunset begin to bustle with activity. The skills, knowledge, and awareness that humans developed over thousands of years of living with darkness contained wisdom that electric civilization has forgotten. The species that evolved to survive in a world of dangerous nights, that developed complex social structures, the deep connection to natural rhythms, the ability to navigate by celestial indicators, the heightened sensory awareness that darkness required, these may be more valuable than we realize. Entertainment industries flourish as people can safely venture out after dark. The night that once shaped our species, our cultures, our very souls, has been defeated by the simple flip of a switch. Whether this victory was worth the price we paid remains one of history's greatest questions. The skilled craftspeople who specialized in nighttime work, the nightsmiths, the night bakers, the night watchmen, either adapt to new roles or find their specialized knowledge shops extend their hours. Theaters schedule evening performances, and people venture out for pleasure rather than necessity, the distant hum of a world that never truly sleeps. Let yourself drift back through the centuries you've just experienced. Feel the weight of that knowledge settling gently into your consciousness, the understanding of how profoundly darkness once shaped human. Picture their faces in the candlelight, their careful rituals of preparation, profound gratitude for each dawn they witnessed. The electric light that allows you to read these words, the safety that lets you sleep without fear, the technologies that connect, they were not so different from you. They loved, they feared, they hoped, they dreamed. But they lived in a world where the simple act of surviving the night required courage, skill, and community support that we can barely imagine. Rest now in the knowledge that you've touched something timeless and essential. The shared human experience of finding light in darkness, hope in fear, and community in the face of uncertainty. The stars that once served as humanity's compass, calendar, and clock fade from view, visible only to those who travel far from cities. We gain safety, convenience, and unprecedented control over our environment. But we lost our intimate relationship with the natural world that sustained our ancestors. The celestial knowledge that was once, the ancient wisdom of reading weather patterns by stellar visibility, becomes irrelevant when electric weather stations provide forecasts. The careful rationing of light that shaped human behavior for centuries disappears. When illumination becomes as simple as flipping a switch, but as you watch its unwavering light, you realize that in conquering darkness, humanity may have lost something essential, the hard-won wisdom that comes from understanding that survival is never guaranteed. That light is precious because it's temporary, and that the greatest appreciation for dawn comes only after enduring the long, dangerous night. The ancient fear of darkness that shaped human behavior for millennia begins to fade within a single generation. Children who grow up with electric lights do develop the hypervigilance that kept their ancestors alive through dangerous nights. The deep relief of dawn, the profound gratitude for surviving another night. The careful rituals of nighttime preparation, all these fundamental human experiences become obsolete in the space of a few decades. The night, which was once humanity's enemy, becomes another opportunity for commerce, entertainment, and social interaction. The fundamental relationship between humans and darkness has been permanently altered. You watch as the first electric lights spread through cities, transforming not just the physical landscape, but the entire rhythm of human existence. The social changes follow quickly. Children no longer need to learn the survival skills that their parents mastered how to navigate by stars, how to detect danger in darkness, how to preserve fire through long winter nights. You observe how electric light changes the nature of work itself. Disconnect them from the natural world their ancestors knew intimately. The transformation of urban spaces is dramatic and immediate. You witness the gradual disappearance of the night sky as electric lights create the glow we now call light pollution. Essential for survival becomes the specialized domain of astronomers and navigators. The psychological impact of electric light is profound and immediate. You see how electric light changes the very architecture of human settlements. Windows no longer need to be positioned to maximize daylight. Rooms no longer need to be oriented toward the sun. The economic transformation is equally dramatic. The night economy that once operated in secret shadows becomes open and legitimate. Suddenly worthless, entire professions disappear within a generation. Historians still argue whether the transition to electric light represents pure progress or involves significant losses that we only beginning to understand. You begin to understand that electric light didn't just illuminate the darkness. It fundamentally altered what it means to be human. Around the management of darkness, that created rich cultural traditions celebrating the daily victory of light over shadow. This species was transformed almost overnight into something different. The electric bulb continues to burn steadily, its filament glowing with the power to banish night itself. As electric light spread across the world, transforming every aspect of human existence, you understand that you've witnessed the end of one chapter of human history and the beginning of another. 300-word wind down now as you lie in your modern bed, surrounded by the soft glow of electric devices' existence. How completely we've transformed our relationship with the night. Imagine the millions of people who lived and died in that pre-electric world, each one carrying the skills and wisdom you've glimpsed tonight. Let your breathing slow and deepen as you consider how that ancient world created the foundation for everything we are today. You too, the world, all of these grew from the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who learned to thrive despite the darkness. Feel yourself settling deeper into sleep, carrying with you a new appreciation for the simple miracle of artificial light, the profound luxury of safety after dark, and the incredible journey that brought humanity from firelight to electric illumination. Sweet dreams of starlight and electric glow, of ancient wisdom and modern comfort, of the long journey from darkness into light. Sweet dreams.